She's married to a much older real estate magnate, which, in that case, you're hired.
It all started with one late-night jab. Jimmy Kimmel took a shot at Karoline Leavitt's marriage, and let's just say she wasn't laughing. Karoline clapped back hard, and before anyone knew it, a throwaway joke turned into one of the messiest public blow-ups of Trump's second term. So what exactly went down, and why is the internet still eating it up? Let's break it all down. The joke that sparked the firestorm. Let's set the scene, shall we? Karoline Leavitt, the 27-year-old White House press secretary, the youngest in history, by the way, has found herself in the crosshairs of late-night host Jimmy Kimmel. Now, Leavitt isn't just any press secretary. She's a trailblazer who shattered the age record previously held by Ron Ziegler, who served under Nixon at age 29. But her historic appointment isn't what caught Kimmel's attention. No, it was something far more personal. Her marriage to Nicholas Riccio, a 59-year-old real estate magnate with a rags-to-riches story that would make even the most hardened cynic reach for a tissue.
She's married to a much older real estate magnate, which, in that case, you're hired.
That quip, delivered with Kimmel's trademark sardonic smile, wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a calculated jab that drew a direct parallel between Leavitt's personal life and Trump's own background in real estate and history of age gap relationships. The insinuation? Crystal clear to anyone paying attention that Leavitt's marriage might have influenced her hiring, tying her personal life to her professional role in a way that many found deeply inappropriate. But to understand why this joke landed with such explosive force, we need to understand the backstory. Leavitt and Riccio's love story is what Hollywood would call unconventional, a 32-year age gap that has made them targets for speculation and, let's be honest, more than a little mockery on social media. They met in 2022 during Leavitt's congressional campaign when a mutual friend hosted an event at one of Riccio's restaurants. What started as a professional acquaintance blossomed into friendship and eventually love.
I met my husband during my congressional campaign. A mutual friend of ours hosted an event at a restaurant that he owns up in New Hampshire and invited my husband, and I was speaking, and we met, we were acquainted as friends, and then we fell in love, as you said. And
was there any I can't date him, he's 59
yes,
or 57,
of course.
whatever.
I mean, it's very atypical love story, but he's incredible.
Leavitt has been remarkably candid about their relationship, describing it as atypical, yet deeply supportive. In that same interview with Megyn Kelly, she went on to call Riccio her greatest supporter, best friend, and rock, hardly the language of someone in a relationship of convenience or political calculation. She even joked about the whirlwind nature of their life together, saying, "I walked into your life and it's been a circus ever since," which Kimmel later echoed with his circus-like atmosphere remark about the White House. The couple got engaged in December 2023, welcomed their son Nicholas Nico Robert Riccio in July 2024, and married in January 2025, just before Trump's second inauguration. A whirlwind romance, yes, but one that Leavitt has consistently framed as genuine and supportive. But here's where the plot thickens like a political thriller written by someone who's never actually worked in politics. Kimmel's joke wasn't a one-off. It was part of a pattern of mockery directed at Leavitt that spans multiple instances, each more pointed than the last. Let's break it down, shall we? First, there was Kimmel's debunking of Leavitt's claim about the U.S. military turning on water in California for wildfires. He compared this to Sean Spicer's infamous inauguration crowd size claim, essentially calling her a liar to her face. Well, not literally to her face, but you get the point. Then came his mockery of her description of Trump having a spine of steel regarding tariffs, suggesting it was no match for the brain of mashed potatoes. Ouch. Political commentary? Sure. Personal? Not yet. But then came the age gap marriage roast, and that's when the gloves truly came off. Kimmel didn't just cross a line. He took a flying leap over it, did a somersault, and landed with a flourish in territory that many consider off limits, mocking someone's personal life and romantic choices. The timing couldn't have been more pointed. Leavitt had just made history as the youngest press secretary ever, a professional milestone that should have been the focus of the coverage. Instead, Kimmel chose to zero in on her marriage, implying that her relationship was somehow a factor in her appointment. The subtext was clear. She didn't get the job on merit, but through personal connections that echo Trump's own biography. Now, to be fair to Kimmel, and I'm being generous here, late-night comedy has always pushed boundaries. Johnny Carson roasted presidents, Jay Leno had his political jabs, David Letterman was no shrinking violet, but there's something uniquely personal about targeting someone's marriage, especially when that marriage has already made them targets of social media trolling and mockery, and the trolling has been relentless. When Leavitt shared wedding photos on Instagram in March 2025, the comments section turned into a virtual firing squad. "You and your dad look so sweet," and "she married her own father." When she appeared at the White House Easter egg roll with Riccio and their son, similar comments followed. "Glad to see Grandpa came into town for Easter," and "Is that Nico's grandpa?" Some users even accused her of deleting negative comments, suggesting the backlash was even worse than what remained visible. This is the context in which Kimmel's joke landed, like a grenade in an already tense battlefield. The implication that Leavitt's marriage might have influenced her hiring wasn't just a cheap shot at her professional credentials, it was pouring gasoline on an already raging fire of public mockery about her personal life. And let's be clear, there's a double standard at play here that's so obvious it might as well be wearing a neon sign and doing jumping jacks. When men marry much younger women, it's often met with high fives and knowing nods. When women marry older men, especially in positions of power, the narrative shifts dramatically to questions about motives, ambition, and authenticity. It's a sexist double standard that's as predictable as it is disappointing. But Kimmel didn't stop at the marriage jab. In that same segment, he described Leavitt as the ringleader at the White House, where she promised a new and more circus-like atmosphere going forward. This wasn't just mockery of her profession. It was a direct echo of Leavitt's own words about her relationship with Riccio, suggesting a calculated dig that connected her personal and professional lives in a way that many found deeply uncomfortable. The backlash was swift, but not in the way you might expect. While social media buzzed with debate about whether Kimmel had crossed a line, the most significant response came from an unexpected quarter Leavitt herself. And that's where our story takes its most dramatic turn. You see, press secretaries are typically the ones answering questions, not making headlines. They're the voice of the administration, not usually the center of controversy themselves. But Leavitt isn't your typical press secretary. At 27, she represents a new generation of political communicators who understand that in today's media landscape, sometimes the best defense is a good offense, and offensive she became. In a move that shocked Washington insiders and delighted Trump's base, Leavitt didn't just respond to Kimmel's joke. She launched a full-scale counterattack that left no doubt about her willingness to fight fire with fire. The gloves weren't just off, they were thrown in Kimmel's face with the force of someone who has absolutely nothing to lose and everything to prove. But what exactly did she say? How did this escalate from a late-night joke to what some are calling an unprecedented clash between the White House and entertainment media? And perhaps most importantly, what does this tell us about the Trump administration's media strategy in his second term? To answer those questions, we need to dive deeper into Leavitt's response, the White House's official position, and the way this feud has exposed fault lines not just in American politics, but in our broader cultural conversations about gender, power, and the boundaries of comedy. And that's exactly what we'll explore in part 2 of our deep dive into this explosive confrontation, the public reaction. When we left off, Jimmy Kimmel had just delivered a verbal uppercut aimed at Karoline Leavitt's marriage, suggesting her relationship with a much older real estate magnate might have influenced her hiring as White House press secretary. A low blow by any standard, but especially pointed given the online trolling Leavitt had already endured over her 32-year age gap marriage. Social media, predictably, exploded. The hashtags #LeavittVsKimmel and #MarriageJoke began trending almost immediately. Twitter, or X as we're supposed to call it now, became a battlefield of competing narratives, with reactions falling along predictably partisan lines. Trump supporters rallied around Leavitt with tweets like, "Karoline Leavitt nailed it," and the backlash proved she hit a nerve. They praised her for standing up to what they characterized as liberal media bias and defending traditional values. Many pointed out the perceived double standard in how the media treats women in the Trump administration versus those in Democratic administrations. On the other side, critics accused Leavitt of manufacturing outrage and using the incident to distract from substantive policy issues. Some pointed out that Kimmel had targeted numerous Trump officials before, arguing that this was nothing new or particularly personal, just the rough and tumble of political satire that comes with the territory of public service. Reddit communities were similarly divided. In R Politics, a thread about the exchange garnered thousands of comments, with many users focusing on Leavitt's qualifications and performance, rather than the marriage controversy itself. One commenter wrote, "She's deflecting from her inability to answer basic questions about the administration's policies by turning this into a personal grudge match with Kimmel." Another countered, "If a liberal woman had been attacked this way for her marriage, the outrage would be deafening." In Our Centrist, a discussion titled, "Anybody Else Find Karoline Leavitt More Unbearable Than Trump?" attracted 391 votes and 352 comments, reflecting the polarizing nature of Leavitt's communication style even beyond this specific incident. The media coverage was equally fragmented. Conservative outlets praised Leavitt's courageous stand against Hollywood Hollywood elitism, while progressive publications criticized her thin-skinned response to routine political satire. Cable news panels debated whether Kimmel had crossed a line or whether Leavitt was overreacting, with heated exchanges that mirrored the broader political divide in the country. Former CNN anchor Jim Acosta entered the fray, calling Leavitt a bad liar and a kid, which prompted a sharp retort from Leavitt. "Jim, at least I have a job." The exchange highlighted the increasingly personal nature of the conflict, with professional criticism blurring into personal attacks on both sides. What made this clash particularly significant wasn't just its intensity, but what it revealed about the Trump administration's media strategy in his second term. Under Leavitt's leadership, the White House press office has adopted a more aggressive, confrontational approach to the media, one that directly challenges perceived bias and doesn't shy away from personal confrontations. This approach was further evidenced by Leavitt's announcement of a new credentialing system for independent journalists, podcasters, social media influencers, and content creators, a move that many interpreted as an attempt to dilute the influence of traditional media outlets and bring more Trump-friendly voices into the White House press corps. The Kimmel controversy also shed light on the challenges Leavitt faces as a young woman in one of the most visible positions in American politics. At 27, she's not just navigating the treacherous waters of White House communications, she's doing so while facing scrutiny and commentary about her personal life, appearance, and relationships that her male predecessors rarely had to contend with. In many ways, the age gap in her marriage has become a proxy for broader cultural debates about gender, power, and authority. Critics point to the relationship as evidence of something potentially problematic, while supporters see it as irrelevant to her professional capabilities and nobody's business but her own. That tension was visible in an exchange with CBS News reporter Jennifer Jacobs, who pressed Leavitt on whether contracts targeted by the Department of Government Efficiency were legally fraudulent. Leavitt's response, "I would argue that all of these things are fraudulent," was criticized as vague and unprofessional, with some suggesting that her defensive posture was emblematic of broader insecurities about her qualifications. But perhaps the most revealing aspect of this entire controversy is how it highlights the continued blurring of lines between entertainment, politics, and personal life in the age of social media and 24/7's news cycles. When a late-night comedian can provoke a formal response from the White House press secretary that dominates news coverage for days, we're witnessing something fundamentally different from traditional political communication. The incident also underscores how marriage, historically considered a private matter, has become political fodder in our hyper-polarized environment. Leavitt's relationship isn't just a personal choice. It's a cultural signifier that people use to make assumptions about her values, motivations, and character. The same is true for many public figures, but the scrutiny seems particularly intense for women in politics who continue to be judged by different standards than their male counterparts. As this controversy continued to unfold, both Kimmel and Leavitt had decisions to make. Would Kimmel double down on his joke, apologize, or ignore the backlash? Would Leavitt continue to center this conflict in her communications strategy, or pivot back to policy matters? And how would the public's perception of both figures evolve as a result of this high-profile clash? Those questions would be answered in the days that followed, as both parties calculated their next moves in a political entertainment chess match with no clear rulebook and increasingly high stakes for everyone involved. The conflict had transcended a simple joke and response, becoming instead a flashpoint for conversations about respect, professional boundaries, and the role of humor in political discourse. As tensions escalated and new players entered the arena, what began as a late-night quip was quickly transforming into one of the most unusual and revealing media conflicts of Trump's second term. And that's what we'll explore in the final part of our analysis: how this confrontation reached its climax, what it tells us about the changing media landscape, and why it matters for the future of political communication in America. The aftermath and what it reveals about modern political media. As the dust began to settle on what social media had dubbed #MarriageGate, both Jimmy Kimmel and Karoline Leavitt found themselves at a crossroads. For Kimmel, the question was whether to apologize, double down, or simply move on. For Leavitt, it was about balancing her desire to stand up for herself while still fulfilling her primary role as the voice of the Trump administration. True to form, Kimmel chose option 2, doubling down with the comedic equivalent of pouring gasoline on a fire that was already burning out of control. On his next show after Leavitt's press room response, Kimmel dedicated nearly 7 minutes of his monologue to what he called the White House's temper tantrum. Apparently, I've touched a nerve with the Trump administration's daycare director, Kimmel began, setting the tone for what would be a relentless barrage of even more pointed jokes about Leavitt's age and marriage. I'm told that the press secretary is very upset with me for mentioning that she's married to a man who's old enough to be her father. Well, I want to apologize to fathers everywhere for the comparison. The studio audience's reaction was mixed, laughter punctuated with uncomfortable groans, a reflection of the nation's divided response to this escalating feud. Kimmel pressed on, suggesting that his joke had hit too close to home for a certain orange someone who also has a thing for much younger women. This was classic Kimmel, using Leavitt as a proxy to attack his real target, Trump himself. It's a tactic he's employed consistently throughout both Trump administrations, part of what has cemented his reputation as one of the most politically liberal late-night hosts alongside Stephen Colbert.